What's going on? Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. What's going on? Out, Netflix is absolutely mooning. My goodness, it was up like $10, went up $14. Now they're pushing it over 20. Absolutely absurd. As you kind of see, I do actually have Netflix up on the screen right now. I mean, my PT is actually still higher than this, so I expect continuation. I don't know exactly how much more monstrous type of move we're gonna get overnight here from Netflix. We'll probably see some analyst ratings tomorrow. Likely some upgrades to really push us up. And the thing you gotta also think about with Netflix is that you gotta remember there's a lot of people that's been trapped with Netflix here, right? A lot of people that are being bailed out with this little recovery that's taking place since we had some monstrous gap down on back-to-back occasions here within the past year or two, right? So it's just been monstrous moves off of Netflix here ever since we kind of bottomed out. It's been a nice steady grind of higher lows, higher highs, and I'm still watching for us to basically trend up close enough towards that 352 mark is where I actually have us pushing. That'll basically be about another near 10 to 9 to 10 point move from where we are right now. Once we get up towards that 352 mark, I mean I'll have to see if we actually break that to really analyze if we end up getting higher than that. Because if we really were to push over that 356 mark, I believe that the next pivotal level that you're probably watching is somewhere close to 370, which will be another significant move, near 20 point move to the upside. So that's going to be something that'll be rather interesting. I do want to see though. I want to see if we actually get that break over 352 here roughly come tomorrow morning as we continue to push and they're trying to push this about 10%. It looks like come by the morning is very realistic that we do end up breaking that 352 mark. And I believe my next PT that I'll be watching around would be around 367 is my next PT that I'm watching above 352. All right. So it'll be monstrous to see exactly how well this holds up by morning. And the fact that we're up about close to what, 7, 8% off of some analyst ratings tomorrow morning and some broader market participation, kind of giving us a little bit of a boost off of back to back red days here for the broader market. I would not be surprised if we actually opened up at a resistance of 352 and then we end up seeing if this pushes further or not. All right. By the way, Lobo, good afternoon, my dude. EMPH, I know Energy has actually not been doing so well. I know that I actually came on live on what on Tuesday. That was basically right before we had the retail data as well, right? And I actually talked about pretty much two leading indications about retail data, and not necessarily the fact that the retail data itself was going to be bad numbers, but also because of the fact that I talked about two different stocks in particularly that to me are just really rather the core of the retail sector, right? And that was looking at Target and also looking at Walmart because the one thing that I actually kind of highlighted was the fact that if you looked at Target off the 2 hour, which I popped up on the screen the last live that we did, and that was basically looking at an ascending channel action that was taking place, and it looked like it only had so much more gas left in the tank before it was gonna break down. And what better catalyst for it to basically break down than the retail data? And that's essentially what we got. We got the breakdown of the channel. We got a nice little retest, little bear flag that's looking to form beneath that trendline support of this channel, and we should see continuation to the downside and ultimately completing this gap fill down towards 153 is what I'm looking. So roughly about another $5 move, in my opinion, is awaiting for target here for this continuation to the downside. And then we'll have to see if it breaks down below this gap fill here. I believe the next pivotal level that you're watching ultimately will be down towards 150 and a half, and that'll basically be from current levels here after hours. You're basically looking at about an 8 to 9 point move here to the downside beyond that gap fill. All right. So that was one illustration that I was watching for ahead of that retail data, and then the other one that I also had my attention on was watching this Walmart chart. Although, you probably remember this because I actually was calling for you on this one. Was Walmart dead here? I zoom it out, you can basically see a nice little ascending, broadening wedge, and that was playing out, holding up a little bit, kind of making a little bit of a higher low right before that data came out, and we had a nice nosedive right into support. I basically was talking about that zone, a little bit of a demand zone here. I was watching was that 139 to 140 half is what I was potentially watching. Now we're basically right at the bottom end of that zone. Do we see some buyers pretty much present? Do we see this act as a value play here as well? Do we see the bounce at that trendline support essentially, and look to see if we can break back north above 140 half. If we can get back above 140 half, then that pretty much indicates the fact that, yeah, you also have a head and shoulders that's playing out. with a bearish ascending broadening wedge, and that should lead us to further downside here off of this, breaking this, basically a bearish pattern here, and then that would take us down towards 134 is what I actually am targeting. All right, so that's another one. Pretty much, if I were to give you more so one that I'm more so confident in terms of direction here, I believe those two names should rather end up seeing some continuation to the downside on the back end of what that retail data basically already implied. All right, I will say Netflix. I mean, I pretty much talked about it. I'm actually surprised that it's actually holding up as well as it is, but given the fact it actually regressed quite a bit. I mean, it was pushing about 8% up after hours and a little bit of a regression. The big two key levels that I basically talked about was pushing towards 352. If we break above 352, the next pivotal level here would be up towards 367 is what I'm going to be looking at. So a lot is likely going to end up changing though come tomorrow morning. We know that those analyst ratings, the broader market pretty much is also going to have something to also say about this, whether we see the gains hold or we see a bigger regression off of this little after hours gap up. And so that's what I think it's probably better to pretty much analyze it come tomorrow morning. I'm still in the camp that I don't think we end up breaking 352, particularly this week. Rather, I think you'll probably get a better shot at breaking 352 next week. But again, pretty much your analyst earnings, it wouldn't surprise me if they actually opened it up at resistance, in which case we could see a bright green market from a broader perspective. All right. Let's see what else there was. I was gonna actually pretty much basically take a nice little look at SPY. I think we've all been looking. I came close enough to my support that I was watching near the low of the day here. That was pretty much tapping right around that 387 mark is what I was looking at as we got a nice little reversal. And then all eyes were basically on that gap fill that we ended up basically getting within inches of before the close. Right, I think everyone was watching. Once we basically put in that bottom on the day, we started to see a nice little reversal start to take place. I will say it kind of seemed a little bit choppy in terms of that reversal, but nonetheless, a nice little slow grind that we had into that gap fill. Now, I do want to see if we get a little bit of a continuation. The bigger level that I want to see is if we get continuation to the upside here off the back end of kind of Netflix giving us a little bit of a broader market boost. I want to see if we can get up towards this 393 half mark and if we can push above that. Otherwise, that 393 half to me right now, that's basically my top end of this range that I'm watching. Even if we do get a push, I want to see if we get the push beyond that 393 half for the continuation for a broader market kind of push as tech earnings are kind of kicking off here. Otherwise, we reject 393 half. I don't think that's going to be particularly healthy, and that'll basically end up putting me in the case where I believe we end up retesting the low, particularly that we had from today, and we can ultimately trade down lower. In which case, in terms of targets to the downside, if we trade down lower and we take out today's low that we had, I believe we can trade down, particularly down towards 382 is my lower end target. All right. So that's just basically the pivotal levels that I'm watching. Either we break above to the upside over 393 half, or if we can get above that level, particularly, I believe we can come down as low as 382. And we'll have to see, particularly once we get down to 382, what the market conditions are, what's market sentiment to see if we get escalation below that or not. All right. But that's basically what stands out to me. Other than that, I did see a little bit of relative strength here out of Apple. I don't think anything's changed in terms of my Apple chart here. We've been consistently putting in these higher highs, higher lows off of Apple. We basically wicked right into my resistance that I had close enough to that 138 half mark. A little bit of regression, but nonetheless, off of the 4 hour here, we have a nice little higher low, higher high being put in. But I do want to see off of this daily action here, did we actually put in a higher low? Granted the fact that we've had these past two red days, in which case now where's my support to actually look, okay, where's the floor ultimately before Apple really just starts to nosedive as it's been trying to hold some relative strength. Well, I want to see if Apple can actually hold 133 going into tomorrow to close out the week. If we can hold 133, it looks like it's a positive sign, and then we'll look to pretty much retrace and push right back up towards that recent high from Wednesday, and that'll put us right back towards that 138 high to see if we get basically a higher high per se. All right. But if we break below 133, I believe we trade down to 129 rather quickly. And that is what is pretty much on my radar as we put in this little higher low here today. Rather, I want to see if once we come down to support, I want to see if we can end up holding that 133. If we can't hold 133, like I said, it looks like the most meaningful target to the downside will be towards 129 is what I'm watching for. All right. So that's Apple to pretty much keep an eye on that one. One quick sec. Okay, my bad. The other name that I was gonna take a look at was particularly looking at Tesla, another name that I think we're all pretty much fond of. Basically looking at Tesla, I can essentially look at a little rising wedge action that's taking place off of Tesla here. And then the other factor that I can also look at is essentially the same thing correlating to Apple. You have higher lows and higher highs as the market's kind of giving us a little bit of a push here since we last bottomed. So I want to see, all right, if we're going to continue to put in these higher highs, essentially you want to see if we can get above that 136 half that we just pushed here to start the week, or vice versa. Do we end up getting continuation below to complete this gap fill, and that will put us down towards 120 for a completion of the gap fill that dates back towards January 17th. All right, and that was essentially 2 days ago. So 117 for the completion of the gap fill below. I believe it would end up essentially melting if we broke back below 117. But I believe that then the other flip side scenario would that be all right? What's the bullish case? What's the level that you want to play to the upside? I believe there's a viable play here if you can actually get this to break out above 131, 131 and a quarter. That's a viable trade to go long, and then you look to take out that recent high from 136 half. All right, that'll basically be essentially how I look to play it. Let's see what else there is across the board here. The other name was Meta. Been a nice little slow grind as well. It's been in the gutter, kind of how Netflix was. Both names got slaughtered. Both names are getting the slow, nice little grind up. Watching a little bit of a support, a little bit of a floor also that we've been trading here the past few days. Essentially, that floor is 132. And if you're looking for continuation, you want to see us break above 138, in which case looking for follow through above 141 half to trade up towards 146. All right, if you break down below 132, I believe that's where you look to go short and you trade this down. Particularly, you have two different targets here. One is sitting at 126, and then below that, you have a gap fill that starts below 122. All right. I'm in the camp though with the fact that I've seen Meta actually hold a lot of pretty much resilient, kind of similar to how Netflix has been resilient since they both got slaughtered. I don't anticipate this breaking below 132 even if we have another bloody day tomorrow. So the viable trade to me that I would be looking for, look to see if you can get a break over 138 and secure some profits at 141 half for continuation above that up towards 146. All right. Lobo, any news on Costco? Let me take a look. Let me see what's going on with Costco. It's up $4. Winners and losers from retail data. I mean, it already got slaughtered from retail data. If I were to really tell you in terms of this, I don't believe that news is actually anything that's remotely telling me that it's a strong enough for a reversal. I believe you can trade it up as high as about 477, but that would basically still essentially be a higher low that you're putting in, and it's likely going to end up giving up all the entire gains that you're seeing right now. So regardless, whatever that news is, I don't see anything on my end just yet on Costco. Let me actually check one quick spot real quick. I'll tell you if there's anything. Yeah, it's not trending right now after hours. I don't see anything that's standing out to me on news related, but let me just check one other quick page to see if I can get some news off of it for you. One quick second, Lobo. Let's see. Anything? No. I don't see any analyst ratings or anything on it. Yeah, I mean, nothing's standing out to me right now. Just checking as well. Yeah, I don't see anything that's standing out to me right now. I mean, I'll keep an eye. If I do actually find any news on it, I'll drop it in the chat and I'll tag you for it. But I don't see anything yet on it, just quite yet. But yeah, like I said, I think it could trade up to 147, but I wouldn't make much of it. I think it's gonna end up going right back down. All right. Let's see what else. EMPH. No, I did not cover that. Let's take a look and see what's going on with EMPH. I've been hearing it's gotten slaughtered. I know that's already down to what about 100 and somewhat dollars since it actually put in that most recent high. And would you look at that? We're actually in gap fill right now. It actually closed right dead center of that gap fill. In which case you're looking at gap fill to be completed down towards 219. You can call that 220. Below that, if you end up trading below that gap fill, I believe the next viable swing, and I say swing because obviously this is more of a volatile type of name here in terms of how much it trades and how much it moves for the daily range. But the next move here will be taking this down towards that $200 mark, and you also have another gap fill below, and that basically starts at 199.61 to be precise. All right. So I would watch if I were to really tell you where to take the next short, not to necessarily just take it right off of this little kill candle that you had here today off of the daily. Granted, the fact it's down about almost 11%. I would say you watch to see at whatever point it breaks under 209, and then you take that $10 move to that $200 mark for that completion of gap fill. Well, not necessarily completion, but the next gap fill below. So watch for if you're not in that trade already. I'm assuming that a Lobo you're in it already. Yeah, you're up 73%. But if you're not in that trade yet, I wouldn't chase it for this completion of this gap fill that you're already in and off of such a big kill candle because you're likely going to get somewhat of a bounce here, particularly within the next day or two. I would say wait to see when it ends up breaking below 209, and that'll be the next viable short to me in terms of just playing it off of levels. All right. Because right now you're kind of in no man's land within the completion of the gap fill and also retesting where that prior breakout was dating back towards the end of July from last year. So you're likely going to see a little bit of a chop, a little bit of some dead cat type of bounce, right, in terms of relief. And then we'll see how it ends up reacting at that support of 209. Cracks that, I think that's where you go short for that next play and take that $10 move right down for the next gap fill. All right. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything else. Let me actually just kind of glance back to see what Netflix is doing. So giving up quite a bit of gains here. So one thing that actually kind of did I get disconnected? Okay. I'm assuming you guys can hear me. If you can't hear me, just kind of give me a little bit of a buzz. But I was actually gonna just mention one other thing that stands out in terms of relative strength here on this push after hours for Netflix. Just looking back at it, if you heard me when we started the live, it was actually pushing up about 8%, close enough, right? Now it's actually regressed. It's already cut those gains in half here after hours. That is not a positive sign. And that's why I actually pretty much iterated the fact that I didn't expect it to break above that 352 mark as we were pushing 340-ish, right? I wasn't anticipating that we were going to break 352 here this week. So I believe that you're going to have probably a viable little dip buy type of opportunity here. In terms of floor, if we end up giving back the gains here, I would watch us down towards 311 if we end up giving back all the gains, as we already gave back half of the gains here from the highs that we put in after hours. So the floor to me, watch 311. I think that's ultimately the floor that I'm watching here. Essentially, if we give back all, if not most of these gains, watch 311, and then you're watching to see at whatever given point you trade back above 333, then you look to trade this back up, and then essentially that's where my target comes into play at 352. All right. But I don't think it's necessarily a good sign for, I guess, a bigger type of move here tomorrow, as we already get back half of those gains. And instead of showing that relative strength, looking like it's going to steamroll tomorrow and a bigger gap up, it's a lot of regression that's taking place. So it looks like the street is probably not particularly happy with the guidance that was given because that's the later effect that you usually get in terms of a stock holding its gains or not is likely that guidance, and that's more so what's probably hit that stock. All right. Meta looks bad on the daily. Well, it's kind of been in the same camp of how Netflix has been doing. That's what I was actually talking about. That those stocks have actually just been beaten up. They're actually getting that little bit of a push. You do have a nice little downtrend break here off of Meta, and that's why even though the market's been kind of relatively weak here the past 2 days, Meta's actually still showing relative strength in my estimation here. Right? And that's why the other thing is looking at levels. I want to see as long as Meta holds 132, I think you can relatively stay neutral to bullish here, watching for upside beyond 141 half. If you break the 132 mark, then in terms of you saying that the daily looks bad, then you could pretty much look at that gap fill here down below, and that'll probably be your viable trade down below 122. All right. Now, the other factor is that, of course, you do have earnings coming up at end of the month here. Well, not end of the month, beginning of the month of February here. So, bigger question mark for pretty much everyone here that's all trying to determine Are we gonna have an earnings run up for a lot of these tech names, as we're basically within a 2 week stretch, right, of a lot of these major tech names giving their earnings? So is it plausible at the fact that you're saying that the daily looks bad, that we're gonna crash so much ahead of the earnings? I would probably pump the brakes on that. I think probably the worst case scenario you're looking at would likely be that gap fill down below if you do crack 132. That would be the most viable play, I would say, for you if you're particularly looking for the bearish case. All right. But other than that, I think I went through pretty much the names that kind of illustrated what I wanted to point out. I was basically looking at the retail. I think retail is going to pretty much end up dumping. I did not look at XLE. I think that's the last thing I kind of want to take a little bit of a peep at. But XLE, actually, just looking at the daily here, doesn't particularly look too bad. We had a nice little higher low that we put in, solid recovery that we put off of that. I will look tomorrow. I think the bigger level to watch on XLE here going into tomorrow. Watch to see if we get a move over 90 half. Right around that 90.52 mark, I would watch on XLE if we get a push beyond that. Then we could see a bullish continuation here. Otherwise, if we break down, but if we hit that as a resistance, that 90 half mark, then I would look to particularly go right back short on XLE. And that's pretty much your if and then scenario in terms of just watching the levels. All right. So 90 half, that's pretty much your big level to watch on XLE. The retail, I'm pretty much overall just bearish on it in general. I don't see any kind of particularly bullish chart within that sector. And of course, as I mentioned, Walmart and Target kind of leading the way. Lobo just had me glance at Costco. It also looked like crap. So I would look for that to pretty much be your bearish case scenario. And then obviously we want to see particularly if Netflix is going to hold up the tech sector, or do we end up having another kind of similar day to what we had today? And that's why I outlined some of the levels that I did. All right. But other than that, I will wrap up today's session. I appreciate you guys joining as always. Annette, has the guidance been lowered so much that tech in general will outperform because the bar is so low? I don't think it's necessarily because the bar is so low. Right now, the tightening is still existent, right? So that, yeah, you could say that the outlook is kind of dimmed because no one's expecting too much to happen. So you're likely gonna have some of these beaten up names that are likely going to get a nice bounce. Some of these names that have been just beaten up in terms of their multiples. Like a name particularly, like let's say in instance, Tesla's a name that's already been beaten up so much from where it was relatively. I think if I recall, where was the most recent highs, like around that 300 mark post split. I would pretty much anticipate that, yeah, it's probably going to get a little bit of a bounce here if they put up some decent numbers. But yeah, I would look for those names that have been more so beaten up, kind of like how you're seeing with Netflix. Any kind of relative, glimmer of hope for that company, and that's exactly why you saw it pop off, what, 20 something dollars right off the bat. But names that I think are likely going to take more so of a beating, if I really had to tell you right off the bat in terms of the heavyweights of tech, I believe Apple's going to take a hit. I think Microsoft is going to take a hit. Those kind of names, I believe that's actually been holding us up as much as we have been. I think those two names in particular stand out to me in terms of their multiples being lowered and essentially the stock taking a little bit of a leg down. All right. But yeah, I don't think there's too much hope in terms of the market, in terms of tech earnings, and that you could have some particular names that actually have been beaten up already that will outperform. All right. So hopefully that kind of gave you a little bit of an answer for you there. All right. But like I mentioned, I will wrap up today's session with that. Appreciate you guys joining as always, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Later.